Eleanor, for God's sake, get your daughter away from that man. Right now. Caroline Sterling's voice was sharp as a shard of ice, cutting through the meticulously crafted tranquility of the children's Zen garden. As the perfectly coiffed, unopposed chairwoman of the Seraphina Estates Homeowners Association, her word here was tantamount to law. It wasn't a shout, but something worse, a cold, controlled command, hissed with impeccably veiled contempt. Eleanor Vance stood frozen. The latest Aura Tech smartphone, a masterpiece of technology her own company had created, slipped from her numb fingers. It landed on the velvety zoysia grass with a silent thud, but in Eleanor's world, it was a thunderclap. Her entire universe, a multi-billion-dollar empire, a life scheduled down to the nanosecond, had just contracted to a single, inexplicable scene. Samuel Jones, the gardener, was kneeling on one knee. He was the quiet, black man most residents looked straight through, as if he were part of the landscape. But now he was the center of everything. His large, soil-stained hands were gently pointing to a wild daisy, its pure white petals a tiny, resilient intruder in the planned perfection. And beside him, her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, the small flame of her life who had not uttered a sound in 1,095 days, was whispering. Ever since the horrific car crash that had stolen her husband's life and snatched her daughter's voice, Lily's world had been a vast, crushing silence. Eleanor had thrown millions at it. The top therapist from Boston, neurologists from Harvard, the most advanced brain scanning machines that could map her child's silence. All had failed. Science had failed. Money had failed. A mother's fierce, desperate love had failed. And now, a man who was all but invisible in their world had succeeded. A single word escaped Lily's lips, as clear as a crystal bell in the morning air. Daisy. The silence that followed the word was heavier than the 3 years of silence that had preceded it. It was a silence filled with impossible questions. For Eleanor, a woman who built her empire on data and logic, this was an anomaly. This miracle brought not just hope, but a bitter, searing humiliation. It exposed her utter powerlessness. "Don't you see, Eleanor?" Caroline hissed again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she moved closer. "People like that, they know how to take advantage. The girl is vulnerable." The phrase "people like that" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. But Eleanor no longer heard her. Her mind was a tempest of confusion, shame, and a fragile, painful sliver of hope. She watched as Samuel slowly rose to his feet. He didn't spare Caroline a glance. He showed no anger, no defensiveness. Instead, his eyes met Eleanor's for a brief, eternity-long moment. In their dark brown depths, she saw something more unsettling than defiance, a profound weariness, a peace forged in fires she couldn't possibly imagine. It was as if he had faced this situation, this judgment, 1,000 times before. He gave her a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement. Then he quietly gathered his tools and placed them in his worn wheelbarrow. As Samuel walked away, the slight limp in his left leg became more pronounced. For the first time, Eleanor noticed the faint scars that ran down his forearms, silvery lines stark against his dark skin, like maps of war she didn't know the names of. Lily turned, her blue eyes, for the first time in years, alight with a vibrant spark. "Mommy," she whispered again, her voice still frail but real. "He heard me." Eleanor swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched the gardeners retreating back, then looked down at her daughter's radiant face. In that instant, she realized Lily's silence was not the only mystery she had to confront. Why, of all people, had her daughter chosen to speak to this man? And why, when she looked into his eyes, did she get the feeling that the pain he carried was even greater than the silence her daughter had just broken? The perfect garden around her suddenly felt suffocating, its tranquility replaced by the roar of newly born questions. Caroline Sterling never wielded a sledgehammer when a scalpel would do. Her cruelty was polished and precise. That evening, an email was sent from her account to the entire population of Seraphina Estates. Its subject line was lethally innocuous, a gentle reminder on community safety. The email mentioned no names. It spoke eloquently of the importance of maintaining professional boundaries between residents and staff. It stressed the need to be vigilant and to report any behavior that seems unusual, especially around our children. Every word was carefully chosen, a sugar coating over poison. It didn't need to name Samuel Jones. The image of the black gardener kneeling beside the small blonde girl had already been planted in their minds. Soon, the whispers began to spread like an invisible mold across the manicured lawns. By the infinity pool, over the clinking of cocktail glasses, one would murmur, "He seems a little too friendly, don't you think?" In the book club, between the rustling of pages, another voice would add, "I heard he's a veteran. You know, they can have issues." Prejudice was dressed in the elegant robes of justifiable concern, a familiar and effective tactic in their insular world. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Aura Tech, Eleanor Vance was waging her own war. With the instincts of a CEO accustomed to analyzing threats, she had ordered her best security team, former Mossad and MI6 agents, to conduct a deep background check on Samuel Jones. She needed data. She needed certainty. She needed a logical answer to the illogical miracle she had witnessed. The results, when they appeared on the 30-inch screen in her private office, only deepened her confusion. Criminal record, completely clean. A gaping question mark. Military file, exemplary. Sergeant Samuel Jones, U.S. Army. Multiple decorations, including the Purple Heart. Honorably discharged. Nothing suspicious. And then, an unnerving gap. A 2-year silence in his employment history. It was followed by a brief, almost buried note. A 6-month voluntary treatment program for post-traumatic stress disorder at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Eleanor's heart sank. A cold dread crept in her chest. Issues. The neighbor's whispers echoed in her head, now amplified by an official document. Could Caroline have been right? The primal fear of a mother began to eclipse the curiosity of a scientist. She had spent 3 years protecting Lily from the world. Had she inadvertently invited a new danger into their sanctuary? She pulled up the live feed from the Seraphina Estates security cameras, high-definition images streaming directly to her computer. She watched Samuel from a distance, his every movement, his every interaction with the environment. She searched for a sign, a wrong move, anything to confirm her worst fears and end the torture of not knowing. But what she saw was the very opposite. She saw that Samuel never approached Lily. It was Lily who was drawn to him, like a sunflower turning towards the sun. She would sit at a respectful distance, watching him work. He was a tall, powerfully built black man, yet his movements in the garden were surprisingly gentle, almost one with nature. And he, seeming to sense her presence, would slow his work. He showed her how to feel the rough texture of an oak's bark, how to smell the rich, damp earth after a rain, how to recognize the call of a cardinal. He wasn't trying to heal her. He was simply present, and his quiet presence was more potent than any therapy. Eleanor felt her logical world tipping on its axis once again. Finally, Eleanor couldn't bear it anymore. The conflict between the alarming data and the evidence before her own eyes became too much. She shut down the monitors, left her office, and drove straight to Seraphina Estates. She found him tending to a bed of roses, his long fingers gently pruning away the withered leaves. She approached, not as the commanding lady of the manor, but as a mother on the edge of a precipice, the fatigue and fear etched onto her face. "What did you do to my daughter?" she asked, her voice trembling, laced with both accusation and a desperate plea. Samuel stopped his work. He slowly straightened up and turned to face her. Soil smudged his forehead, and his eyes met hers, unwavering, undefended. He studied her for a long moment, as if measuring not her words, but the pain behind them. Then he answered, his voice low and steady, a resonant hum from a deep place. "I didn't do anything, Mrs. Vance." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I just listened." "Listen to what?" Eleanor pressed, a surge of frustration rising within her. She wasn't saying anything. A sad smile touched Samuel's lips. It was the smile of a man who had seen too much. "Silence has a language of its own," he said, his voice almost a whisper, yet it resonated in the air. "Sometimes it's the loudest thing there is." The answer explained nothing, and yet it changed everything. It didn't give her the data she sought, but it spoke to a deeper truth. It wasn't the answer of a predator, but of someone who knew the sound of his own shattered silence. A seed of trust, small and fragile, was planted in the skeptical soil of Eleanor's heart, and she knew that whatever this man's past held, she had to find the truth, not from the poisonous whispers, but from the source itself. Saturday arrived with a burst of brilliant sunshine and the laughter of children. An extravagant birthday party was underway in the main garden of Seraphina Estates, a showcase of wealth with a three-tiered cake, a professional clown, and children in designer clothes chasing each other across the lawn. Caroline Sterling was at the center of it all, a queen surveying her court, her smile as tailored and controlled as everything else in her life. Eleanor was there too, keeping a polite distance, her eyes never straying from Lily, who sat quietly under a large oak tree, watching Samuel work at the edge of the property. And then the perfection was shattered. A shrill scream, followed by a choked sob. A little boy, the grandson of one of the most influential residents, had been stung on the neck by a hornet. It happened so fast. The boy's cry turned into a horrifying, strangled wheeze. His face began to swell, turning a frightening shade of dusky blue. His eyes widened in pure, animal terror as he fought for a breath that wouldn't come. Chaos erupted. Mothers screamed. A few fumbled for their phones to call 911, their trembling fingers misdialing. Caroline Sterling, the woman always in control, stood pale and paralyzed, a mannequin of horror dressed in Chanel. These were powerful people, capable of moving markets with a single call, but in the face of imminent death, they were utterly helpless. And then, from the edge of the garden, a figure exploded into motion. It was Samuel. In an instant, every trace of the quiet, humble gardener vanished. It was as if a mask had been ripped away. He didn't run. He moved with a terrifying purpose, covering the ground with the speed and efficiency of a panther. His limps seemed to disappear. "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" His voice boomed, no longer the low, steady tone Eleanor had heard before. This was a different voice, a command sharp and forged in chaos, a voice accustomed to snatching life from the jaws of death. A young mother shakily handed him an auto-injector. Without a flicker of hesitation, Samuel was on his knees, tearing the fabric of the boy's expensive shorts and firing the dose of epinephrine into the vastus lateralis muscle. Click! The sound of the injector was sharp and clear in the sudden silence. He checked the boy's airway, expertly tilting his head back, and rolled him into the recovery position. There was not a single wasted movement. Loosen his clothing, he ordered the stunned onlookers. Don't give him anything to drink. He was in complete command, exuding a calm that was almost inhuman. Eleanor stood breathless, witnessing an unbelievable transformation. This was not a gardener. This was a soldier. When the wail of the ambulance finally grew closer, Samuel had stabilized the boy's breathing. Two paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and gear. The lead medic took in the scene, saw the used EpiPen, and looked up at Samuel. "Nice work," the medic said, then he squinted. "Wait a minute. I know you." He stared at the scars on Samuel's arms, then at his calm face. "Field Hospital in Kandahar, right? You're Doc Jones, the one who—" Samuel cut him off with a slight but firm shake of his head. "You're mistaken," he said quietly, his voice receding back into its usual soft-spoken cadence. He stepped back, trying to fade into the shade of the trees, retrieving his trowel as if it were his only shield. But it was too late. Eleanor had heard. "Doc Jones, Kandahar." The words echoed in her mind all the way home. She didn't sleep that night. Sitting in her dark office, surrounded by sterile silence and the blue glow of her monitor, Eleanor did what only people with her level of power could do. She made a call, not to her security team, but to a 4-star general at the Pentagon who owed her a significant favor. She gave him only a name and a place: Samuel Jones, Kandahar. Hours later, a file with the highest level of encryption arrived in her secure inbox. As Eleanor opened it, her world began to unravel. The truth wasn't just surprising. It was staggering and profound. The man she knew as her gardener was Dr. Samuel Jones, one of the leading pediatric neurosurgeons of his generation. Graduated first in his class at Johns Hopkins. A rising star with hands that were described as a gift from God. After September 11th, he had walked away from a multi-million-dollar career and a brilliant future to enlist as an Army combat surgeon. And then, the Kandahar report. It read like a tragic epic. A field hospital bombed. 17 critically wounded Afghan children. Under enemy fire, by the flickering light of battery-powered lamps, Dr. Jones had performed surgery for 14 straight hours. He had saved all 17 of them. But his best friend, a combat nurse, had died in his arms when a stray mortar round hit their tent. His PTSD wasn't an issue. It was a battle scar, the cost of his courage, and an immeasurable loss. He had never been fired. He had simply walked away. He had sought out gardening, not to hide, but to heal. To use the same hands that had pieced back together traumatized brains, to cultivate life from dead soil, to find peace by nurturing things that grow. In the splendid, sterile silence of her office, Eleanor stared at the screen, hot tears blurring the text. The truth hadn't just dawned on her. It had crashed down like an avalanche. She had not merely misjudged a man. She had committed a kind of sacrilege. She had looked at a hero and seen only the color of his skin, his dirt-stained hands, and his limp. And she was utterly, profoundly ashamed of herself. Eleanor's charity, the Aura Foundation, held its annual fundraising gala in the opulent ballroom of the Seraphina Estates Clubhouse, a glittering affair that drew the entire elite of Connecticut. $1,000 gowns swept across marble floors. The chime of crystal champagne flutes sounded like music, and conversations were whispered with a collective net worth in the billions. This year, in a twist of poetic justice orchestrated by Eleanor herself, the theme of the evening was finding your voice. She had approached Samuel in the garden that afternoon. He was carefully staking a young tomato plant. Eleanor offered no hollow apology or lengthy explanation. Words were too cheap for the truth she had uncovered. Instead, she simply handed him a heavy, embossed invitation. "Dr. Jones," she said, addressing him by his rightful title for the first time, her voice imbued with a profound respect. "Your presence tonight would be an honor. Not for me, but for the children we are trying to help. Let them see what a real hero looks like." Samuel intended to refuse. The spotlight was the last battlefield he ever wanted to step onto. But then Lily, who had trailed her mother into the garden, took his dirt-stained hand. She was speaking more now, in short, hesitant sentences. "You'll come, Samuel?" she asked, her clear blue eyes looking up at him in a plea he could not deny. He sighed, and a slight nod was his answer. When Samuel entered the ballroom that night, a nearly imperceptible hush fell over the room. Eleanor had secretly arranged for a flawlessly tailored tuxedo. It fit him like a second skin, accentuating the tall, broad-shouldered frame of a soldier. His limp was still there, but now it seemed not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the price of valor. He did not look out of place. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace, scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a man who had been in far more dangerous situations. Caroline Sterling and her circle saw him and froze. They exchanged glances, a flurry of contempt and alarm. In their eyes, this was the final proof. Eleanor had completely lost her mind, tragically manipulated by this man. Caroline, in her unwavering belief that she was the moral guardian of their community, decided she had to act. She had to save Eleanor from her own foolishness, here and now, in front of everyone. Midway through the evening, after Eleanor's opening remarks, Caroline took the stage, requesting a point of personal privilege. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing with false sincerity. "I believe in these uncertain times, It is our duty to protect the safety and integrity of our community. We must be vigilant against potential security threats, and we cannot let personal sentiment cloud our judgment about unstable elements who might infiltrate our lives. The barb was aimed directly at Samuel, who stood silently at the back of the room. Before Caroline could go any further, Eleanor stepped gracefully to the podium. "Thank you, Caroline," she said, her voice like ice. "You've raised a very important point about identifying threats." She signaled the technician. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the foundation's logo, went dark and then flickered to life. It was not a presentation. It was a short video, a recorded testimony from the four-star general at the Pentagon. The general, his face stern and his uniform laden with medals, recounted the story of Dr. Samuel Jones in Kandahar. Declassified images flashed on the screen. Diagrams of the field hospital, a list of 17 children's names, and a grainy photograph of a surgeon at work under a flickering light, his face taut with concentration amidst the chaos. The entire ballroom was utterly silent, the only sound the general's deep, authoritative voice. When the video ended, leaving a heavy, profound silence in its wake, Eleanor spoke again, her voice calm, but every word a razor's edge. "The real threat, ladies and gentlemen, is not the scars of a hero. The real threat is ignorance. It is arrogance. It is the snap judgment based on the color of a person's skin, their job, or the wounds we cannot understand." Then she delivered the final blow. She took out her phone and connected it to the sound system. A short audio clip played, the poisonous whispers of Caroline and her friends by the pool, legally recorded in a common area. People like that, they know how to take advantage. Catherine Blackwell's voice echoed. "I heard he's a veteran. You know, they can have issues." The silence in the room was now suffocating. Caroline's face drained of all color, shifting from red to ashen white. A social execution had just taken place without a single drop of blood. But the spectacle was not over. From the side of the stage, Lily Vance, in a simple white dress, walked out on her own. Every eye in the room turned to her. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone to her height herself. She looked out at the sea of faces, her eyes clear and unafraid. And then she spoke, her voice pure and strong, echoing through the grand ballroom. "Samuel isn't the gardener," she said. "He's my friend." She took a breath, her eyes finding his at the back of the room. "He taught me," she continued, her voice filled with a wisdom far beyond her years, "that even after the longest, coldest winter, flowers can grow again." For a moment, no one moved. Then, from a corner of the room, one person began to clap, then another and another. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, a thunderous, rolling wave of applause washing over them. Not just for the little girl who had found her voice, but for the truth that had been revealed, and for the quiet hero who had stood in the shadows for far too long. The applause eventually subsided, but its echo remained in the air, a sign of an irreversible shift. Caroline Sterling and her coterie were gone. They had not left in a storm of righteous fury, but had simply vanished into the shadows, crushed under the weight of a truth they themselves had forced into the light. Their downfall was not a legal sentence handed down in a courtroom, but a social verdict rendered in humiliating silence, a far more painful punishment for people who lived by appearances. The story was over for them. On the stage, bathed in the warm spotlight, Eleanor turned to Samuel. Every eye in the room was on them. Her voice, no longer the cool instrument of a CEO, but warm with genuine emotion, carried clearly over the microphone. "Dr. Jones," she began, "Oratech is founding a new institute. We're calling it the Vance Institute for Integrated Therapy. Our mission will be to combine the most advanced technology with the primal healing power of nature and human connection. I can think of no one more worthy of leading it." She paused, her gaze locking with his, an offer that was far more than a job. "This is not charity. It is a request. We need you." Samuel stood there, for the first time that night, looking uncertain. The lights, the attention, the offer, it was all a world away from the quiet sanctuary he had built for himself in the garden. He had come for Lily. He had never sought recognition or a position of power. He looked at Eleanor, and then his eyes scanned the crowd and found Lily, who stood beside her mother, beaming at him, her smile wide and unafraid. In that moment, he understood a simple truth. Hiding in the garden had been a way to staunch the bleeding of his own wounds. It had kept him alive, but to truly heal, to turn the broken pieces of his past into something meaningful, he had to use his pain to help others. He had to step out of the shadows. He walked forward and took the microphone from Eleanor. He looked out at the audience, but his words felt as if they were for the little girl beside him alone. "I accept," he said, his voice deep and certain. It was not the acceptance of a job. It was the acceptance of a new mission, a new way forward. The story does not jump forward 6 months. It doesn't need to. The final scene takes place the very next morning, as the first rays of a new day filter through the leaves of Seraphina Estates. Samuel and Lily are in the Zen garden. He is not in a soiled gardener's uniform, nor in the previous night's elegant tuxedo. He is in a simple shirt and jeans. He is no longer the gardener, not yet the director. He is simply Samuel. He is kneeling on the earth, just as Eleanor first saw him. But this time, he is showing Lily how to plant a new seed. Their hands, one large and one small, one dark and one pale, work together, gently pressing the seed into the rich, damp soil. Eleanor watches from her patio door, a warm mug of coffee in her hands. She says nothing. She does not interfere. She simply bears witness. A soft, genuine smile plays on her lips. Samuel covers the seed with the last bit of soil. He looks at Lily, his voice as deep and grounding as the earth they are tending, but his words seem meant for the whole world. "The miracle isn't the flower, Lily," he says. "The miracle is the seed. It's small, buried in the dark, easily overlooked. But inside it, he gently taps a finger to her chest. It always holds the promise of something beautiful to come, something stronger and more beautiful than before." The camera slowly pulls back, leaving the image of the man who has found his purpose and the little girl who has found her voice, together, cultivating a new future. They're not just planting a tree. They're planting hope. And in the quiet of the morning garden, that is the most powerful sound of all. Today's story shows us that true strength isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to see beyond appearances. The world is full of heroes in unexpected places, waiting for someone to listen. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Story Precious for more stories that prove the most valuable treasures are the ones we find in each other. Thank you for watching.